from the people, right? They collect folk tales like the Germans, right? And yet they impose this whole thing in a very elitist this kind of language. Right? You must, instead of let us. Right? So it's a very strange kind of contradiction. So the anti-vanguard people would say, you're trying to create from below something in a very elitist way. So this is a very, very contradictory kind of cultural policy. And it's also a very compromised set of policies, like between the idea for workers of the world unite, internationalist and nationalist, and even local. Right? Protect the local character of peasant culture, or to make the peasants more internationalist. So it's very, very contradictory. And also there is this idea that has caused a lot of pain for creative people, and that is the idea of socialist realism, especially in the 1930s. And it was the same in China, the debate between the leftist writers, after which people like Ding Ning and so on and so forth have to write what is properly leftist literature, socialist realist. What is socialist realist literature? So it is not real according to reality. It is real according to what socialists want reality to be like. Okay? So socialist realism. And there are three ideas. Classicals is how socialist realism is a relation of art to the proletariat struggle with the bourgeoisie. So art should reflect how the workers struggle with the capitalists and reflect this kind of reality. So Parthenos is the idea of the identification of art with the Communist Party. So art should serve what the Communist Party wants people to be like. And as Nautopmos is a relation of art to common humanity. Sometimes, the equation of common humanity with Communist Party and with proletariat struggle, right? So full of contradictions within. But that, it has become a state cultural policy. And a lot of the political struggles against intellectuals came from this assumption. Right? So what we think of as censorship and oppression and so forth from socialist states actually come out of a socialist cultural policy that most people are very bitter about. And this is true, but not only in this sense. Right? And there are a lot of tactics from artists that are very creative. And it comes out of reacting against socialist realism. And in Latin America, magical realism is one way of resistance and reaction against, like in Argentina and other places, right, against a kind of socialist realism, and in Cuban art as well. But besides these things that we usually understand socialist cultural policy with, like they have censorship, and if you look at the posters from the Maoist era, they are very kitsch, and they manufacture this kind of sentimentality you want. So the poster wants to make you feel that everyone is so, happy seeing Chairman Mao. Everyone is so happy working so hard. And you have a woman truck driver taking a guy with an axe to do something somewhere, and everybody is so enthusiastic. Everyone is very thrilled and very positive. All the cheeks are pink, so on. This is kitchen manufacturer. These are the things we usually know and understand about socialist cultural policy. But we seldom really look behind, and there are other things that I would like you to take note of. For example, besides these contradictions, there are some things that sounds very interesting, like what they call the four strands of mature Soviet model of cultural policy: regionalism, centralism, and urbanism for local and national sensitivities. Right, and why urbanism if you also respect the peasants that much? much. And you exploit the peasants at the same time. And also workerism, for many in control of the Soviet system. So up to the 1980s, compared to the US, the artist minimum subsidy is less, but none of the art groups and artists go into major debt, and all of them survive. And they can become full-time artists. Whereas in Hong Kong and the West, very few people can become full-time artists. In Soviet countries, you can. No need for state to pay for art. No need for state subvention, as art is given price control. A box office price that most citizens can afford. And box office is already allowing art to survive self-sufficient. That's the case in the USSR. And the administrative cost was proportionally much lower than the United States. So although we imagine Soviet Union as a big bureaucracy, but not really in this case of art, the bureaucracy was not as top-heavy as you think. Right? The bureaucratic cost is a lot less than the United States, proportionally. Of course, in the amount of how many billions is different. It's a lot less, but proportionally, they're less bureaucratic. And also, there are policies like tax exemption, deduction, and direct support to big organizations, so on. So although they're financially centralized, but they're a lot more efficient. So this is something we don't actually expect when we know about them. And what is the socialist conditions nowadays in the post-socialist states? Generally, what you see is actually cultural devastation, where socialism was dropped in favor of capitalism. And in your readings, you will see the case of Hungary in the 1980s. And also the case of Socialist Republic of Vietnam's massive destruction of national cultural infrastructure after they shift to capitalism. And also the Czech Republic's decline by privatization of cultural institutions. For example, the film production volume, creativity, and edge greatly dropped because in Prague, 85% of studio employees were laid off all at once. So this shift from socialist to capitalist policies actually, to more laissez-faire, small government, big market, so on and so forth, actually created huge cultural devastation in some of these places. And the story will be told in greater detail in the reading. Now, this last little bit on post-colonial Latin America. What we see here is also something surprising. Despite financial stress, colonial destruction of indigenous cultures, periodic banning of cultural forms by military governments, dismissal by Enlightenment and Christian Eurocentric values, there was state support for certain popular forms and practices, like Mexican muralism, Brazilian samba, Cuban Sun magical realism, testimonial narratives, so on, are very, very creative and popular and influential in the world. Right? And also in Latin American art and culture, you find a lot of cross-fertilization among cultures, a transculturalization in general, a sense of hybridity, right? Which is beyond just putting Eurocentric values and local values together, like what our government thinks. Put East and West together equals Hong Kong, right? Not as simple as that. It's a kind of hybridity that is beyond this double bind of Eurocentrism and localism, or post-colonial nativism. And also, there is a very interesting effect of the colonies, ex-colonies, being more dominant than the original colonial states in terms of cultural paradigm. Right? Spain and Portugal learning to cope with Latin American Spanish and Portuguese language.